today for Sexient Beings. Um, your leaders are Alix Pruett. I'm a SLR coach and reality guide, and I work with people in helping them connect to having thriving relationships after potentially a lifetime of being in toxic patterns and belief systems that keep perpetuating these experiences they don't want to be having.
That's where I introduce myself.
Yeah.
And I am Rachel, and I am a life coach slash psychologist who specializes in existential and mindfulness meditation to help women re-establish a sense of self and identity after domestic or narcissistic abuse.
Beautiful. So, do you want to introduce the topic since this week was your topic of choice? And then we can dive in.
Sure. So we had decided on coping mechanisms, like what are good or bad coping mechanisms in life. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think I personally like to stay away from like dubbing things as
Good
good
or
or
bad?
bad, right? And that is just my personal preference
I'm with you
because
on that.
that can end up muddying the waters so much, right? And that's like
Yeah.
those coping mechanisms that are no longer serving us, they came in at a point where they did, right? And
Right.
they were doing a
Yes.
job, and but we can end up when we label it with the like bad
Bad.
piece, right?
Yeah.
It can put so much negative connotation
Mm-hmm.
on it. And so like I
I'm
think
with you.
there's that space of like creating appreciation for what was serving at one point, but recognizing, hey, this isn't working for me anymore and moving on
Yeah,
from that space.
I agree with you on that. Part of me wants to say like healthy and unhealthy relationships, but that's basically the same thing.
Yeah, I tend to stick with or like when I end up like talking about it and on the very unconscious level, it's just how it comes out anymore. But it's like things that are serving and not serving, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Perfect.
those not serving spaces tend to be the ones that like they're creating other prominent issues in our lives now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a big coping mechanism that many people have is consuming plethoras of alcohol, right? Alcoholism is
Mm-hmm.
a very rampant thing in our society.
Yeah.
And like there was a point in time for that individual where like alcohol may have helped them survive,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But now there's other impacts coming up in their life that it's not creating the life and the happiness and the thriving of what they want to be experiencing. So it's moving away from those spaces.
Yeah. That makes me think this last week I was speaking with a woman who wanted help with redirecting her coping mechanisms.
Hmm.
And one of those coping mechanisms was alcohol, the other
Yeah.
was binge eating.
Hmm.
And, she, voiced that she had tried, other coping mechanisms like journaling.
Hmm.
Um, but sitting in her feelings, even writing them down, she could only do it if she was either drinking or eating
Yeah.
at the same time. And so, one thing I liked about her is that like she wanted to find what worked for her in
Hmm.
coping mechanisms so that she could redirect because she
Yeah.
wasn't happy with the results that the coping mechanisms that she was using were doing to her body. Like she was not happy with her body because she was overweight, because she was binge eating.
Hmm.
And then the alcohol obviously takes its toll on your body as well.
Yeah, hugely, and especially over prolonged use,
Hmm.
right? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
alcohol just doesn't like my body, and it's I feel lucky in that extent, right? Because that's getting into
Mhm.
alcoholism myself has never really been an option unless I want to feel the very ill effects coming up in my
Right.
actual physical body, even
Mhm.
almost immediately upon drinking. But it is such a prevalent coping mechanism that people have,
Yes.
and especially in the sense like you can express, like what I've noticed, right, is that people can tend to express their emotions from that state. That's why like when people
Yes.
get really drunk, they'll tend to like get really sad or really angry, and it's all these emotions that are pent up, but they're still not actually feeling their feelings,
Mhm. Yeah.
even though they're being expressed. And so there's still that level of disconnect because there's an unsafety with being in our bodies and feeling our feelings and those
Mhm.
sensations.
And there's a safety net within at least drinking,
Hmm.
which is you can open those doors,
Yeah.
but then you can close them again
Yeah.
once the sobriety sets in. Or, like hallucinogenic, like psychedelic mushrooms.
Hmm.
I'd never advise someone to open or go down that without guidance
Yeah.
because there are some doors you can't close. And
Yeah.
so
There,
I think,
well, because that's creating all sorts of new neurological connections as well
hmm hmm
when you go down that path. And it's a
exactly.
beautiful path to go down. But yeah, if you don't have the knowledge yourself, and I mean,
hmm
there's so much research you can do to gain knowledge, and then there's also the lived experience, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
so you can take in a certain amount of knowledge, but you're not going to know what that's really like until you're embodied and in that state. But
With
yeah, I think there is a bit of
yeah,
a bypass when it comes to using alcohol or certain substances that create a disconnection
yeah.
in the
Like
body.
a lot of people use cigarettes to
Hmm.
help with like anxiety or feeling overwhelmed.
Hmm.
Um, which is and I am one of those people, but
I
it
have been
is
as well there.
yeah, uh, it's, scientifically proven to do the opposite.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. I've got all
it's
sorts of
not
theories on cigarettes and how they impact the body mind.
uh-huh, and that happens, when you're drinking, if you have a cigarette habit, you usually smoke more when you're
Hmm.
drinking,
Yeah.
and like you were mentioning, it's because like you open up to feeling when you
Hmm.
are drinking,
Yeah.
but then even then, you have difficulty coping with those feelings, and so you go to other coping mechanisms like smoking or eating or drinking more alcohol until, like, you black out.
Oh yeah. No, definitely. And that's where it's the disconnection, and ultimately, like, I mean, I've never actually thought about it this way before, but when you're going to the extremes of blacking out, it's like creating this whole gap between the mind and body,
Mhm,
right? And so that's where you don't have the conscious recognition of the things that happened in the blackout space.
mhm.
That
Yeah.
actually helps confirm some of the theories I had about alcohol already in creating
Yeah,
that disconnection.
and it's unconsciously on purpose in some
Hmm.
way. Like,
Yeah.
we know our limitations when it comes to drinking, or at least we develop that intelligence within ourselves.
Hmm.
We're like, I can't do tequila. That, one shot will always make me black out. But then when something intense happens in your life, you know exactly which one you want to go to. And it is
Yeah.
that one shot of tequila.
Yeah.
Like, tonight's not a one glass of wine with dinner night. Tonight is a tequila night because I
Yeah.
know that I can forget myself with it.
Yeah, and I'd say when most things are being used to an extreme excess and creating a dissociation is where they can tend to become a problem versus a medicine, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what your experience or knowledge is with that, because you
with
do have
the
the
alcohol?
psychology background and everything. Well,
You mean
just
with
with the
alcohol?
psychology background, yeah. With alcohol or really, I mean, I would imagine people could do the same thing with
It's
pot or even with psychedelics in a way. If they go into that space being like, I don't want to feel this thing anymore. Like I've seen where people have used psychedelics, they had a huge problem going on in their life,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And they went into a heroic dose, so over 4 grams of
mhm,
mushrooms consumption, and they decided that in part of their intention with this journey, they wanted this problem to go away, right?
mhm,
And I remember like having conversations with this person around it, and they noticed they felt great for a whole month, right? Like the whole month, they even forgot this was an issue in their life. And it was a big thing, like legal ramifications, other things coming up that could not only impact them, but their whole family. They just forgot until one day, almost to the day a month later, they got a call being like, oh, this is actually going a step further. Right. And I went, oh,
mhm,
that's kind of interesting because like I was sort of getting the impression that you were trying to bypass this feeling. And I notice in my own life, when I try to bypass a feeling, it'll come back around in some way in an even more intense way till I'm
mhm.
noticing it.
I mean, from, like, the a psychoanalytical perspective,
Hmm.
it's anything and anything, everything that can be used
Hmm.
similarly to, like, the psychedelics to, in your words, bypass or, like, forget
Yeah.
the issue.
Hmm.
Um, like, I would say the most common is actually, using people.
Yeah.
So, if you're a parent, you will drown yourselves in, kids activities, so, taking care of
Hmm.
the kids. And
Yeah.
so it's like you're losing your sense of self
Hmm.
and just allowing the part of you that is the parent to
Yeah.
exist. And so I'm not going to deal with that. I'm just going to go, and you convince yourself I can't deal with it because I have all of these responsibilities. And so that
Hmm.
relieves the shame and guilt from the conscious to forget that issue. And if, anyone asks, like, oh, why haven't you been dealing with this? Like, you really should. It'd be, for your betterment. The excuses come up.
Yeah.
But we never view them as excuses.
Yeah.
And, one of those in the alcohol sphere is, oh, but like I come from a long line of alcoholics. It's in my family, it's in my blood, it's in my genes. There's nothing I
Hmm.
can do about it.
Yeah.
Or, like binge eating. It's been a problem for, 20 years. Like, what am I supposed to do about it now? It's too late.
Hmm.
Um, you know, all of these excuses come up to validate coping mechanisms that we have created for ourselves that we inevitably then shame ourselves and are unhappy with because we know that they're not good for us.
Yeah. Because they're just a distraction from the
Hmm.
underlying needs and getting
Yeah,
those fulfilled in the first place. And that's
exactly.
like, I do want to clarify that not just overeating or, I mean, anorexia, bulimia, these things are
Yeah.
considered like diseases or disorders.
Yes.
right? Like
Mhm.
those are not only these like non-serving coping mechanisms, right?
Not at all.
But
Yeah.
getting obsessive with hobbies or about
Mhm.
another person, constantly having some huge running stream of drama going in your life where it's all
Mhm.
the focus on the drama and what he said, she said, they did
Yes.
things. That is a type of coping mechanism because it keeps you from
Yeah.
connecting with what your needs are in your system
Yeah.
as well.
It could even be, binging on television or
Hmm.
or
Oh yeah.
books or podcasts to
Hmm.
the point where you're seldom doing anything else.
Yeah.
And you can't, over time, you do it so much that you can't be doing, simple things like household chores, like washing the dishes. You can't do it without your headphones in, listening to something.
Hmm.
Like you can't be present to just clean the laundry or the dishes. And you can't fall asleep unless you're listening to it.
Yeah.
Like there is no stillness. I remember there was this interview with the Dalai Lama. There's this man who he got his hour in with the Dalai Lama, but it was during mealtime, basically. And so he was having a meal with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama is eating, and this man's not eating. He's just like digging in and just like, I've got an hour. I've got to ask, thousands of questions that, I have because I'll never have this opportunity again to talk to the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
And the Dalai Lama just stops him and he's, puts down his food and he's just like, when you eat, you need to be present and mindful of your eating. Don't waste time with questions. Don't waste time with asking or talking.
Hmm.
You will miss out on the food. And like he
Yeah.
takes a bite of the food and he's like, cherish every bite, like taste every taste, feel how it feels in your mouth, feel smell how it, all in the sensories. And the Dalai Lama basically was saying, shut up and let me eat my food.
Yeah.
And that's what ended up happening. But for like the next like little bit of the video, like this man is just like uncomfortably eating with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama
Mhm.
is just like, I'm eating. Oh, this food's so delicious, and he is fully present in the moment. But the man, you can see on his face and like in his body language that he is unhappy because he didn't get what he wanted in the moment,
Yeah.
and so he couldn't be present.
Mhm.
And so I take that into my life a lot of time as well, like when I'm thinking about, when something happens that, stirs me and I want to go to my coping habits or mechanisms that I know aren't good for me.
Mhm.
I literally relay like in my head, like, am I enjoying my food?
Mhm.
Would the Dalai Lama be proud of me in this moment? Like, I need to savor my food and be present in this moment and feel it and taste it and smell it and touch it
Yeah.
tec- technically with my mouth, but um and so I stop myself and I think about that, and I do what is called stop meditation, which is
Mhm.
stop, think, observe, and proceed. When things are getting overwhelmed, it should take me a minute to 20 minutes. It really doesn't have a time frame on how long that meditation can be, and it doesn't have to be seated. You could literally just be sitting on the bus and like you get a text that uproots you a little bit, and you stop and you think, you observe, and then you proceed. You like make a decision and then you proceed with that.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I do with the Dalai Lama and the food is I stop and I think about it. I'm like, I need to eat this issue. and I
Yeah.
just savor its good and its bad taste, what parts about it did I like? Do I want to change it next time? Like think about those things. And then while I'm digesting, I think about how I want to proceed. And so it seems very simple, but simple does not mean easy. So
No, it doesn't.
you
And simple does not mean like it's low value either. Like
yes,
some of the
same, yeah,
simplest things can be the hardest and carry the highest value, right? That's where
exactly, yeah,
I like people get tired of hearing like, "Oh, meditate, meditate, meditate," right? Like I
mhm,
used to. I was like, I can't fucking do that shit because I'd always imagine having to like sit there with my legs crossed and my back straight and hands on knees. And I was like, my whole system hates the idea of that, right?
mhm,
Like I wanted nothing to do with it.
mhm,
But then the more I started learning about what meditative states were actually getting you into
mhm,
rather than just this space of like trying to not think, right?
yeah, yeah,
I was like, "Oh, I meditate in all sorts of ways. I just wasn't doing it consciously." And there is a very high value in bringing consciousness to that space,
mhm,
right? Like one of the things I started doing very early on was if I'm feeling like stressed out or notice that I'm getting stuck in my head or other things and need to bring myself to present moment sensation, I literally just tried to focus on what the air feels like on my skin, right? So if you're
mhm,
outside and there's a heavy breeze, it's a little bit easier,
yeah,
right? But generally, in most given spaces, like you can feel a mix of warm and cold air moving. It's just getting more and more in tune with those nuanced sensations.
mhm,
And even if you don't, like, you stop to think and
yeah,
be like, okay, I'm going to feel this thing. Like, even imagining you're feeling it,
yeah.
even if you don't actually think you're feeling it, can be valuable.
Well, I think, like what you said about feeling the breeze,
Hmm.
like, I think people get a little bit, um tangled up in the thinking part of it. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to think about what the issue is. Like,
Hmm.
sometimes I will just do like what you said, but like my version of it, which is I pay attention to my breath. I
Hmm.
pay attention to how cold it is going into my lungs and how
Yeah.
warm it is coming out, and how
Yeah.
that is me transmuting the energy around me and within myself. And through me, I am creating heat and warmth.
Yeah.
And that is my power. And, there's a plethora of other scenarios like that, but I'm not literally thinking, oh, okay, so like this just happened to me. So I need to assess and like process everything right now in the thinking of this like stop meditation.
Hmm.
It's not about it being like, like tunnel visioned there, like thought.
Yeah.
It is just relaxing and calming thought
Hmm.
for the present feelings that are coming up for you.
Yeah. Well, and I think breaking that down to sensation,
Mhm,
right, is really valuable. And that's a lot of my training in breath work and
mhm,
the main coaching program I went through. It has breaking it down to that because sometimes when we label it, even with a certain emotion, right,
mhm.
we carry a negative context to what that emotion can mean. And
Yeah,
so, like, getting away from the good bad labeling, even on emotions, can be so important. That's why I still tend to try to not go there um, with defining things in those terms. But
mhm,
um, where was I going with that? Yeah. So, but getting away from the things we've labeled as good or bad, and that's like even if you get to a sensation and you're like, oh, this is painful. But yes, when you're saying it's painful, it's generally something we're trying to reject in our system. We don't want to feel
Mhm.
because we tend to like to avoid pain.
Yeah.
So, going a level deeper than that, what are the actual physical sensations coming up that tell you this thing is painful? Does it feel like a burning?
Mhm.
Is it a pressure? Is there tightness? Like, what is actually there
Yeah.
underneath it? And that can even help shift it. I've had practices I've worked through with clients and in my own experience where it's shifted it just in a few moments from this thing that's really uncomfortable feeling
Mhm.
to something that doesn't feel as like heavy and burdensome.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like,
You transformed it in that moment for
mhm,
yourself.
yeah,
And, what while you were speaking, like, there are so many different terms for what you're talking about, and, like, you've learned
mhm,
it through breath work and other somatic forms, and, like, in the scientific world, I guess, in the psychological world, it's psychosomatics,
yeah,
which is, psycho, the mind, and somatics, the body, and
mhm,
how they have, it's a cycle, it's a spiral
yeah,
that exists with, body, mind. And, it doesn't, they're both the same thing. So
yeah,
wherever you need to, however you need to have it said to you for you to be able to like grasp the concept,
mhm,
like there are multiple ways because it's all the same thing and just different ways of saying it or practicing it. Um, because like that, breath work and chakra work and existential psychology and even
mhm,
meditation, they're all psychosomatic
yeah,
body programming.
yeah.
And
No, and that's, I mean,
yeah.
there's also Peter Levine that is very renowned in the field, but somatic experiencing, it's its
Mhm.
whole own branch, but it overlaps so much with other
Yes.
branches. And that's that idea of like trauma gets stored in the physical body. And
Mhm.
like as humans, we have um, conditioned ourselves to not go through the normal letdown process of
Mhm.
the stress cycle and allow that shaking and excess energy to move out of our bodies.
Yes. Yeah.
So now, if I
Uh,
feel like my body needs to tremble and shake, I just let it happen.
yes.
Where in the past I didn't. Like, it was
And
definitely a
that
thing.
that makes me think of crying. I
Mhm.
have a very big issue with allowing myself to cry over
Yeah.
something that's bothering me. And there's a lot of stigma and shame around that, like if I am crying over a boy, like I'm like,
Mhm.
ugh, no, like I'm shaming myself because, I'm a strong, independent woman. Like, how dare I give a man my power? Like, I can't cry over this, or that's relinquishing my power to him. No, it's not. Like, you are feeling intense emotions. Let it out because if you don't, 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to show up in anger to that person and they're not going to get it
Yeah.
because that's, or it'll show up in your body. Like, as women, we tend to hold a lot in our bladders and our kidneys.
Yeah.
And so it can show up as a UTI or a yeast
Mhm.
infection
Kidney stones.
or kidney stones or a kidney infection,
Mhm.
um,
Or
or
pain and
just
restriction during sex. That's a
yes,
big one as
yes,
well.
that's a very good one. And that all, in this scenario stems from me not wanting to admit that I have feelings for another party,
Mhm.
but that doesn't take away my independence and my strength. And it's not all, crying about it isn't giving up my power to that person. It's me owning to my own power and
Yeah.
saying it's okay to be upset about this.
No, I think crying all on its own, right,
Mhm.
is a hugely valuable resource that
Yes.
has been shamed for so long. in
Mhm.
our society, right?
So
That's
long.
I've
Mhm.
actually had this popping up a lot again recently where it's like, what was it? I was in a session with a client and they've discussed how it has been like they rarely cry, right?
Mhm.
And but in our sessions, they cry almost every single time. It's not necessarily like
Yeah.
sobbing or anything like that, but
Yeah.
there's tears shed. And I was explaining to them just like that every time they cry, I see this as a huge win because it is a release of energy. Mm,
Mhm.
you look at water as the elements, right? It's this like washing away
Yes.
of the old and release.
Mhm.
And also, like in my own experience, I mean, I still remember the very first time I ever cried because I was happy, right?
Oh,
I've had
yeah.
chunks of my life where I didn't cry for years at a
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and I still remember the first time I cried because I was happy, and it was honestly like I was avoiding something that on the other side of it would have felt really sad at the same time. It was like finding out my dog didn't have cancer, right?
Mhm.
But I've noticed that the more I allow myself to cry the sad tears, the more I've actually been able to connect with this other like ocean of tears that exists that are
Mm.
out of joy and gratitude as
Awesome.
well,
Yeah.
right? Like I was was laying in bed with my son and he had asked me to describe what it was like putting him to bed as a baby.
Mhm.
And he's almost 6 now, and this wasn't all that long ago. And I like kind of tried to hold him like I would have when he was a baby and like was humming and singing to him and rocking him. And all of a sudden, I just got hit with this wave of like joy tears because those were such precious moments, right?
Mhm.
To be able to offer him and to give myself in connecting with this little being. But like even back then, just a few years ago, like I never cried about it or connected to those feelings of joy that deeply in those moments. But it was funny because he actually popped up and he's like, "Oh, mom, you're crying. I'll get you a tissue." Like all these things. I was like,
Aw.
"No, like I'm more than happy to be with my tears, bud." And these are very like happy and joyous tears. So like we're gonna let them hang out.
Yes. It makes me
but
think of, yeah, go on.
but when we restrict those the ones that don't feel good,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then we also end up restricting the other side of that.
Yeah.
And we don't notice we dull out both sets of emotions
Mhm.
because we think we're only nullifying one.
It's a balance.
Mhm.
Uh, it's I once had a conversation at a bar years and years ago. It's at least 11 years ago by now, where I proposed this question to this random guy that I met who I said, he's talking about how he just wants to get rid of bad in the world and there just be good. And I said, I asked him, well, what would good be if bad didn't exist? And
Yeah.
he was just like, well, it'd be good. And I was like, well, how would you know that? If bad didn't exist, how would we know that good existed? Wouldn't it just
Mhm.
be neutral or a void or a vacuum? It's like that ignorance. It's not willful
Mhm.
ignorance, it's just ignorance. If you've never had a taco in your life, you have no idea how delicious they are. If you've never
Yeah.
heard of a taco before, you have no idea they exist.
Mhm.
And so you can't actually put that into being. If
Yeah.
there's no balance within that, it's just ether. It's just floating space. It's in Greek mythology. the birth of the universe, which is seldom talked about, which I am so perturbed about because it's just such a beautiful story. Um, so in Greek mythology, Eros, which is known in Roman mythology as Cupid, he is actually the first being, the first god in existence. And he was born out of an egg, and he is the personification of love. And he introduced night and day to each other, who had the most profound romance that actually birthed the universe. That was the Big Bang, was out of a love.
That's beautiful. I haven't heard that story. Like,
And so, without love, night and day would never have met and fallen in love,
mhm.
and then they would never have birthed the universe. And I always, that's black and white, that's yin and yang, that's good and bad, up and without, you can't have one without the other, or you can't have your
Yeah.
universe, and you can't,
Yeah,
and
it's
you
the
need
whole
love
light
to
and
create that.
shadow piece.
Yes, exactly.
That's you literally can't have a shadow without there being a source of light.
Exactly. It would just be black space, ether. You'd just be
Mhm.
floating in nothingness. And so, I proposed that. And I think a lot of people get tripped up on that. You know, when bad things happen, they just want the bad things to disappear,
Yeah.
and bad itself to disappear. And it is very difficult, but I try my best to, within myself, and to communicate with others that we all have the capability to transmute whatever bad is happening to us into good. It is in tarot, the magician is the golden light. The golden light is not just good things; it is everything that alchemy transforms into gold and golden light.
Yeah.
And so, as cliche as it sounds, like, what lessons, or what good came out of that bad thing that happened? What did it teach you? What did you how did you grow from it? Now, who are you as an evolved being through that? And when you look at it like that, you're able to transmute it into that golden light, or that good, for lack of a better word. And so it becomes that harmony with the good and the bad, because yes, it is a balance, but also neither of them truly exist if you're able to turn it into a cycle. It's just a ball of golden light, or a circle that's constantly happening. It's the infinity symbol, or the heartbeat. Like, the heartbeat's a great example of that. Is people are like, I want there to be no bad. I just want to be level. Well, what happens when you are level in a heartbeat? You flatline and you die.
Yeah.
So remember those ups and downs, and remember in your head, visually, if you can. Only it's about 85% of humans actually are able to visualize. Um, but if you think about, that we've got that up on the heart monitor, and we're oh no, we're at the down. But we know that once we get to the peak of the down, that we're gonna rise back up to the top, and that nothing is permanent.
Yeah.
And remembering that change is coming, both good and bad, helps create that golden light, and that peace, and acceptance of what is in that moment.
Well, and I think I know people can have a harder time connecting with their own heartbeat.
Mhm.
Um, it's actually a piece of interoception, but most of us can become aware of our breath. And that's why there
Mhm.
is such a focus on meditation and the breath and breath
Yeah.
work. Um,
Yeah.
but it reminds me of what you were just saying, right? Is there's that same process with the breath. Like you can't just inhale infinitely, right?
Right.
But the
Yeah.
beautiful thing is the exhale is actually the relaxation of the muscles around the lungs as they collapse back down.
Mhm.
And if you actually like push as much air as you possibly can out of your lungs, right? Unless you're continuing to try to hold your breath, like your breath is going to come back to you.
Mhm.
And that's that cycle of like, okay, and I let it go and it comes back. Like, and you don't even have to
Mhm.
try to make it come back. Like your lungs will make sure they get filled.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And that's the one of the other teachings that came out really profoundly is like when you think about the like even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That very base foundation is the physiological needs of the organism, which is usually considered food, water, shelter, right?
Mhm.
But the very, very first one you get, like in the moment you are born, is the breath.
Mhm.
Because if you never take that first breath upon being born into the world, like you're not gonna survive.
No.
And
That's
that's
a
there's a saying in the breath work world that breath is life. And it is. Like
yeah.
that is your most basic foundational need.
It is said in Buddhism that the first word of the Buddha was breath, and it was in a cry. It's
Yeah.
like, what do babies do right after they take their first breath?
Hmm.
They speak.
Yeah. I love that.
And and a lot of people misconstrued that, like, that was just the first word of the Buddha. But Buddhism is we are all the Buddha, so like our first words were breath, all of ours.
Yeah.
But
So I
I
want to
that.
wrap this back around a little bit,
Mhm.
just to like how this relates more directly to coping mechanisms,
Mhm.
right? And that's for me, I would say that the coping mechanisms I've had in my lifetime that are no longer serving, right,
Mhm.
are those ones that disconnect me from
Yeah.
myself and
Yeah.
me, my body, my mind, my yes, my no, my emotions, right?
Mhm.
And the ones that have really transpired change and moving from a state of survival into states of thriving
Mhm.
are the ones that facilitate me being in connection with those spaces, right?
Yeah.
So meditation, breath work, journaling, right? But it does take moving through the uncomfortableness of now being with your feelings and your sensations and your experience.
Yeah. And paying attention,
Mhm.
like a lot of like drinking, eating or not eating, or watching TV. It's not, you're not being present or paying attention.
Yeah.
And I think that stems from the fear that I can't handle the present moment, and if I pay attention it's going to be too overwhelming, and that
Mhm.
fear of death comes in.
Yeah.
And something that one of my mentors always says to me is, like, you've gone through all of that, you've had this, you've had that, have you died yet?
Yeah.
No. I haven't died yet." He's like, "So, do you trust in yourself to make sure that that won't happen in the future? Like, if you like, you seem to be a survivor and not want that death to happen. So, if you realize that one of the things that is stimulating these coping mechanisms that truly aren't serving you right now and may have in the past
Mhm.
or just never did and you just used them, they served whatever word or purpose you want to use for that,
Well, that's
is
a lot of
remember.
also
Yeah.
be learned,
Huh?
right? Learned in the extent that they were what was modeled.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
they weren't
That's a good way
actually
to put it. Yes.
serving for you when you did utilize them, but you didn't know there was another way.
Another option. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's helpful to redirect into a coping mechanism that would be, helpful for and safe for you in your individual person.
Mhm.
If you remember, you kind of have to force yourself, like, but I'm not going to actually die.
Yeah.
Like, it is not, because you feel like the world's crashing in, around you and that, like, your whole world's falling apart. And, scientifically, the like the true intensement or intensity of a panic attack only lasts about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And after that 10 minutes, you re freak yourself out
Mhm.
and go back into it for another 10 minutes because that fear of death just, creates a cycle.
Yeah.
And you're the one in the power to halt that. And that's when we turn to alcohol or food, the whatever.
Are you there? It sounds like it might be cutting out a little bit. All right. Well, I guess I will continue this until she is able to reconnect.
So sorry, I have gotten a phone call.
Oh, that's what
So sorry.
it
Uh,
looks like. Quentin wants to hop on real quick.
okay.
So, welcome to the space, Quentin. Did you have something you wanted to add or say?
I think you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. So talking about coping mechanisms, and a lot of them you guys are touching base on is how a lot of people turn to substances and breath work and sensations. There's also a huge one that I know I've personally found, and it's that ability to have communion and communication with others. And that's
Yes.
the whole part on not not feeling like you're going to die, is being able to also talk through those spaces with other people, because it allows
Hmm.
some of that weight to come off of you and not necessarily go on to that other person, but for it to be released into the universe and be spoken about.
Yeah.
It allows these things to be processed and a lot easier to deal with. So
Yeah. Gives you
Yeah.
that sense of being seen and heard.
yeah.
Well, and there's a big piece of that that I would say comes down to that other person's capacity to hold space
Yes.
and be present for the person, because if you're going and talking to somebody and like you feel like a wall just went down,
Hmm.
right?
or they're scattered and their attention is split in a million different directions,
Mhm.
they're not necessarily going to be as much of a healing space.
Yes.
Yes,
Like,
that is a huge.
go ahead.
I was going to say, and that is a huge thing to consider when you are deciding to talk to somebody about that, because it's unfair to not only yourself but to the other person if you were to just drop a bombshell on them and
Yeah.
they're unable to actually hold that space for you. Because I know there's been times personally I've done that, or I've had that done to me, and it's given me that outlook of like, whoa, that wasn't okay, that wasn't all right. And it's made me realize like there's different ways to branch out and different ways to really get this energy out, this to cope in different ways.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's such huge importance in being seen and heard and understood in our
Yeah.
experience, right?
Yes.
And that's some of the best ways we can do that is through relationship. The sad thing is, most of the places those injuries first occurred, or those
Are in
wounds
that.
occurred,
Yeah.
were in relationship.
Mhm.
Right? So that is where counselors and therapists and psychologists and coaches come in very handy, because there is that foundation of training that's gone in there to make sure they can bring that presence, and that they have literally set aside this time to hold that
Yeah.
space for you to just be heard and seen and received, right? With
Exactly.
whatever's coming up in that moment.
Mhm. Yes. Yes.
And then a really
Couldn't
good way,
agree more.
if the
Mhm.
person you're wanting to talk to has the capacity to hold that space, is just to ask. Like, and that can feel scary and intimidating, because what if they say no, right? But that also tells us, okay, maybe we need to find another avenue. Like, maybe like they have a whole bunch of stuff going on in their life that you don't know about. And that's usually the case.
Mhm.
And maybe you have another friend or a family member, or maybe it is time to branch out to somebody who can hold that space in a professional capacity.
Yeah. And communicating that if you're unable, to afford a professional person for that space, communicating with your friends like,
Yeah.
"Hey, so are you able to hold space for me right now?" And also, on the opposite side of that, knowing your boundaries. Like, are you able to hold space for that person right now? And if you're not, it doesn't make you a bad friend to communicate that and say, you know what, I also have a lot going on. I don't actually think I'm able to.
Yeah.
And that is healthy communication to
Yeah.
help, you know, be able to get that voice out there and, heard by the universe and feel seen and heard
Well, and another
through your
thing,
friend group. Yeah.
whether you're the person like who's wanting to share information, right, about what's going on for you, or the person holding that
Receive
space.
it. Yeah, exactly.
But in that, if you're the person asking, like, and you may not know in that exact moment, like, it may just be welling up and it needs to get out of you. That does happen too. Like, I've definitely been that person. Um, but giving a clarifier of what it is you actually need, like, if you just need somebody to listen, like,
Hmm.
trying to state that, right? If
Yeah.
you want advice or input, like,
Yes.
saying that you want that.
Hmm.
Um, if if you have other questions in on certain things, but you don't want feedback on other things, trying to clarify what it's you are what you are needing, because
Yes.
one that can end up happening so often is the person we're going to, like, there's such a fixer mentality where we don't want other people to have bad feelings, right?
Yeah.
The person receiving is uncomfortable with this person feeling those feelings, so they want to fix it. So they'll give unsolicited advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Some
take
yeah,
away
and, like
from what we're experiencing,
mhm,
especially if you just need to be heard.
yeah. That's like what you just said, one thing my dad used to do when I was younger, when I would, be like, "I need to come, talk to you about something," he'd always say before I started, he'd say, "Do you want me to just listen or do you want me to give advice?" And I got to pick one or the other.
Mhm.
And that, helped me a lot, but it also helped him.
Yeah.
So that way, like, we would, if I didn't want advice, I just wanted to be heard, he knew that that's what I wanted already. And so he wouldn't, muddy up the waters and cause friction that doesn't need to be there between our relationship dynamic because it's already been established.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I do have to get going because I have to go let someone in. So I have the keys.
Don't worry. Thank you so much for joining me today. And
Yes,
then
thank you.
we will be back next Thursday at 1 p.m.
1 p.m.
And
Yes.
I look forward to whatever our next topic will be.
Yes, me
We will get
too.
our head figured out for how those come together.
We will. We've got a good list.
All right. Thank you
All
again,
right.
Rose. And thank you, Quentin, for hopping in and giving your input on having that be, or having that communication with another person be a great resource as well.
Yes, that was great.
Yes. All
All
right.
right.
Everyone,
Have
have
a
a great
wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you. You guys too. Bye.
bye.